So to me, a sleeping pill chronically is like cotton stuffed in your ear. Why you have cotton in your ear? Well, I'm bleeding. Really? Let me see. You take the cotton out and blood's everywhere. So the person stuffs the cotton back in their ear. Well, do you ever see your doctor? Oh yeah, the doctor's the person who gives me the cotton. Really? Have you ever asked your doctor, like, I mean, it's great. I mean, maybe try it once, but if you keep going back to your doctor, every time you take the cotton out, there's hemorrhage everywhere. Aren't you ever going to ask your doctor, what's wrong? Like, why are you bleeding from your ear? That seems really concerning to me. No, I've never asked them that. The cotton's working just fine. It's keeping blood off my clothes, which is really all I care about.
Hello, hello. Welcome one and all. This is Brandon Olin, and welcome to another episode of the Desk-Bound Podcast, where I deconstruct the knowledge of health and wellness experts to share the worst of what's making you unhealthy and what you can do to fight back. My guest today is Dr. W. Chris Winter. Chris is a sleep specialist helping people through his private clinic work as well as his work with professional sports teams and through the book he wrote, The Sleep Solution, Why Your Sleep is Broken and How to Fix It. He's been dubbed the Sleep Whisperer by Arianna Huffington, which, after reading his book and having had this chat with him, it seems like a pretty apt nickname. I'm really excited to bring this chat to y'all as I feel that in the greater dialogue around health and wellness, sleep is a very underappreciated and underrepresented topic. There's a seemingly endless supply of quote-unquote experts out there pitching those miracle diets and workout plans at you, yet genuine experts on the subjects of sleep are somewhat hard to come by. And I know both from my own personal experience and from the conversations that I've had with other people that insufficient sleep, poor quality sleep, and above all else, difficulty falling asleep at night are actually really common issues. So if you're someone who does struggle with sleep, this interview will help bridge the gap for you. In this chat, Chris and I discussed the difference between being fatigued and being sleepy, how having a consistent wake-up time is more important than a consistent bedtime, the effect that technology has on the workings of our mind and subsequently on our sleep, and a whole bunch more. So enjoy this chat with the sleep whisperer himself, Dr. W. Chris Winter. All right, thank you for joining me, Chris.
Thanks so much for having me, Brandon. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on, especially because we had a bit of a couple scheduling snafus, you could call them. We had to push this down the line a few weeks to a month or so. But like I said before we started, I'm really glad to finally get you on because the issue of sleep is one that it seems underrepresented in the discourse around health and wellness, and it seems like one that a significant portion of people, at least people that I talk to, suffer from, including, like I said, myself and people in my own family. So could you just give us a bit of like background, what it is you do and how you got to this point? Like how did you become interested in sleep and what brought you into this whole field in the first place?
Sure. So I was always interested in medicine from when I was really young. So I knew I wanted to be a doctor. So when I went to undergraduate at University of Virginia, my biology advisor said, there's some doctors who are actually looking for help with their research, and it would be a nice thing for you to have as you apply to medical schools, and you might be able to make a little bit of money. So he gave me this big binder full of doctors that were kind of looking for undergraduate help with their research, and one guy was doing this really interesting research on sleep. So I communicated with him and met him, and he was just fantastic and was an awesome mentor. I think he was the first person I wrote about in my at the end of my book when I was thanking people who kind of helped me get to where I was going. So it was sort of accidental. I didn't really think sleep and medicine were things that would sort of shape my future. But as I got into the field and started working in it, the people were interesting. Everything was new. The field was not only exciting, but just people like talking about sleep. I just stayed in it. Went to medical school down in Atlanta and started working with some of the guys who do sleep down there, and just kind of accidentally never left the field. So 26 years later, here we are. It's the only thing I know anything about, but still, this many years later, love to talk about it. educate people about it, see patients, write about it. It's such a great multifaceted field to be a part of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The book is excellent, both just because of the knowledge contained within it. I mean, I've personally applied a lot of what I've learned from it, and I've already seen a massive impact on my sleep, which has been incredibly beneficial. But there's also a lot of just wry humor peppered throughout it, which is really, really excellent. Particularly the part towards the beginning where I believe you said you got some sort of, I'm not sure if it was a CT scan or what, but then you posted the image up in the room where people try to diagnose it, and some people were making some lewd suggestions about what they thought your problem was.
That was sort of a tradition that I'm a neurologist. So when the neurologists were on call, some of the ER doctors, if we ever found interesting MRIs or CT scans of people, we would post it and stick a little post-it note next to it saying, "Can you guess what the diagnosis is?" So you're sort of in fun, but also kind of a learning experience. So I was sitting down on a kind of a dull call night, which never happened. Usually we were just getting slammed with patients in the emergency room at weird neurological things or strokes, but it was kind of a quiet night. And I was talking to a young woman who was a radiology resident, and so she was having a quiet night too, since we weren't sending anybody for her to scan. And I said, "I've never had an MRI. I'd love to see what it's like to get inside one." She said, "Go ahead." And so I got inside, and she scanned my brain, and the cerebellum, which is the sort of part of your brain that's kind of looks like a nut kind of behind your neck, that sort of coordinates your balance and your muscle activities, was a little small, I thought. So anyway, I put it up there. And so people who didn't know it was my brain said, "Oh, I think maybe his cerebellum is a little atrophied." And then the people who did know who it was made, like you said, the lewd comments.
Yeah, they referred that you might have some sort of atrophied phallic organ, if we can
That's
make this
right.
a PG-13 podcast episode.
That's exactly right.
There's a lot of good humor peppered throughout it, which is great because I think, if you can entertain people while you educate them, they're going to learn, pay attention, and apply that much more. But yeah, there's, so much to be gained from it. So why don't we just sort of dive right in? Could you share a little bit about like what your approach or methodology towards sleep care might entail? Like, how is it different from, maybe the treatment people get when they just go to their family doctor, or, as you've touched on throughout the book, the recommendations they get when they read some article where somebody tells them to sleep in their bed upside down? Like, what do a lot of the traditional or the common wisdom miss that you always try to address with your patients?
Sure. So, I think the differences in terms of when we see patients, the biggest one's probably just time. I think the natural instinct is to say education, that sleep specialists simply know more about sleep than the primary care doctors or the magazine articles that you're reading, which is true. But the biggest issue is I think that most people, when they're getting help for their sleep, simply don't get the time or the ability to sit down and talk to somebody about their problems in a way that's holistic. Even the articles we read, and I've just done two interviews already today with different magazines. They tend to be, I've got this short little space to address a question like, why do we sleep? Or if I have trouble with sleepiness during the day, what should I do? And you can tell by the way the lovely author is asking you questions that they've got about 300 word limit. You've got to encompass what I've studied for 26 years in 300 words or less, and which is great that magazines pay attention, media pays attention to sleep, but it's often in little sound bites. So part of the reason for writing the book was I felt like people needed time to sort of sit with the concept of sleep or the concept of healthy sleep and really go through it and read about it at their own pace, digest it at their own pace, rather than just reading this article that says, like I saw on a television show, this poor woman had been struggling with her sleep for 20 years. And literally the advice she got on the talk show was get an instruction manual and read it. And if that doesn't work, put your head at the foot of the bed and your feet at the head of the bed And that's it. So coming up next after the commercial, we'll talk about, diarrhea or whatever they're
Oh
so
yeah,
and the great
decades
thing
of
was is the
suffering solved just
camera,
like that.
right, as the camera moved away from that dialogue between the doctor on the show and the woman and sort of, focused in on the doctor, kind of leading the segue to the next. If you look back at the woman, you can tell she's sort of like, oh, I flew all the way here from Albuquerque for this. Fortunately, she wasn't mic'd, but she didn't seem really happy with that advice. So, yeah, I mean, I think that those things are well intentioned, but in order to really understand sleep, you got to know a little bit more about it, and you also have to understand the problem better, because one of the things we deal with in this country, and I've got this fantastic PowerPoint slide series that's a series of magazine articles or newspaper articles that say things like why 50 million Americans can't sleep, and the next one's from Forbes magazine says why 60 million Americans can't sleep, and the next one's from an NPR show that says why 70 million Americans can't sleep. So it's like this Walking Dead sort of this virus sweeping our nation in terms of making people who used to be able to sleep just fine suddenly not be able to sleep, and they're staggering around in the middle of the night looking for Cheetos and food to eat and complaining about their sleep. So I think that just the education about what it means to sleep, is there really such a thing as not sleeping, even though we talk about it all the time? All these things are sort of put together in the book in a way to be not only educational, but hopefully reassuring that a lot of times it's just a matter of redefining the problem. No, your problem is not that you don't sleep. It's that you don't feel your sleep, or you're unsatisfied with your sleep. Or what I often see is people just want predictability with their sleep. The whole inefficiency, I don't know what's going to happen tonight. I might get in bed, I might fall asleep. It may take me 3 hours to fall asleep. That doesn't sit well with a lot of people. So trying to help them get to a place where they can understand and predict what's going to happen, and regardless of the outcome, feel okay about it, is often really the goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the Walking Dead analogy is a pretty good one. I can just imagine people after a night of poor sleep, 50, 60, 70 million, just trudging into the nearest Starbucks to get a triple espresso shot to pour down their face and hopefully pour some life back in. Yeah, it's interesting because the suggestions that you mentioned on that talk show, it's like now with, I'm not an expert, but I probably know a lot more than the average person about sleep just from reading and interviewing people. I understand why those suggestions could be effective based on the type of issue with sleep that the person in question is suffering from. Like if they have a certain level of anxiety tied to their sleep location, flip upside down and it's like you're in a different place. But it's weird to prescribe a simple solution like that when you haven't even tried to investigate why the person is having trouble sleeping or what specific sleep issue that they're suffering from. So I think, I don't know, part of it I think is the media format in a way. As you said, people can only jam 300 words into an article about sleep, or they've only got a 5-minute segment on a talk show. But I feel like so many of these issues that people are suffering from when it comes to, any sort of health and wellness issue requires much more of a long form conversation, which is part of why I think that, interviews of this nature are a little bit better for discussing them. So out of curiosity, when so say you have a new patient or a new person come in to your office, or you go to them, because I know that I believe, do some work with some different sports teams as well. Where do you generally start? Like, what would be the first question you would normally ask somebody to try to sort of gauge what it is that they're suffering from specifically?
Sure. So initially, I really like for the patient to explain to me why they feel they're here. So, I mean, generally, my introduction is, hi, I'm Chris. How can I help you today? And, you can get either serious answers or flip answers, or some patients literally will tell you they don't know. I'm here because my wife told me to come here. My doctor told me to come here. I'm not really sure why I'm here, which is often a person who's got some seriously significant sleep problems, like terrible sleep apnea, that is causing him to fall asleep every time he sits down. But in his mind, that makes him a great sleeper. I can fall asleep fishing on a boat. I can fall asleep down on the ground or in the middle of a church service. So therefore, I'm a fantastic sleeper. So, to me, it's all about understanding what's motivated a patient to come. And there's all kinds of motivations. It could be somebody who feels like they've been a poor sleeper all of their life. I mean, going back to when they were living at home with their parents, and their parents said, your brothers and sisters are such great sleepers. Why are you so bad? I had a patient last night who, during a night terror, tried to get a patient who came to see me yesterday who previously had had a night terror that somebody was trying to attack her mother. She had somehow gotten a gun in the house. What? And the husband, while trying to wrestle it away from her, she bit a piece out of his arm, called 911, and ran into the woods. And they found her kind of half dressed, knocked unconscious because they think she probably hit a limb on her head. He got arrested for domestic abuse, but it later got thrown out because clearly, number one, she had no recollection of what had happened. Number two, there was nothing on her to suggest that she'd been hurt or abused. And three, she had had episodes like this in the past that they just kind of ignored. So
Jesus,
it really runs the gamut from I don't know why I'm here to my husband may go to prison if we can't figure out why on earth I do these things.
I almost shot him.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's really about what the patient's feeling. And then as the patient goes through and tells you, like I had a patient tell me recently that during the first 9 months of her new son's existence, she didn't sleep. Okay, well, that's her perception, and she's certainly entitled to the idea that she has shattered the world record for sleep deprivation, which is like 11 days and was a complete sham because every time they turned their back on the poor guy, he would fall asleep standing up. But 11 days is sort of considered to be what the record is, and she feels like she went 9 months. Mm-hmm. And you looked at her, she looks like somebody who's a fitness instructor. I've got a vision of what it would look like if we could somehow cattle prod somebody awake for 9 months. It certainly didn't look like this, 28-year-old fit individual. So now becomes the task of, okay, I've heard what you have to say. Now let's talk about what sleep is. Let's talk about real science. Let's talk about the idea that you would never believe somebody who came into your life and said, I haven't eaten in 9 months. Well, maybe a cracker every 3 or 4 days, and they were gaining weight and not particularly interested in the food platter that you had set out in your living room. Mm-hmm. That doesn't make any sense based upon what we know about hunger, but we don't really have that same sort of education about sleep. And when you don't understand something in life, it's very easy to fear it. And that's often what's going on with these individuals.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that a great distinction that you made in the book that when I mentioned it to some other people who have had trouble sleeping themselves, they're immediately like, yes, that's exactly the thing that's happening, which is how you differentiate between somebody being sleepy and somebody being fatigued. Because it seems so often people will find that they're incredibly fatigued at the end of the day, but not sleepy enough to actually fall asleep. Could you touch on that a little bit?
Sure. And that's, somebody told me one time that in Native American languages, there are, I'm totally making this up and I don't want to offend anybody. There's like 30 words for the word green. That we have green, that leaf is green, the grass is green, that sweater is green, your eyes are green. But in their language, that's completely inadequate. Mm-hmm. And I think we have that same sort of trap when it comes to words like tired. I'm tired. Well, that can mean a lot of different things. If you were to run up, I think maybe you should do a podcast sometime with a marathon runner in the middle of a marathon, like for the last couple miles, just run alongside him with a microphone and talk to him. They may describe to you, hey, Brian, I'm really tired, and talking to you is making that worse. Mm-hmm. What they're not saying is that I'm in danger of hitting mile marker 21 and just saying, forget this, lying down in the road and falling asleep. Like that, they're not using the word tired to mean sleepy. They're using the word tired to mean I'm not sure if I have enough energy in my body to get me another 5 miles, is what they're saying.
Yeah, fun story on that. I actually did just run a marathon about a month ago. And I wouldn't quite put it as tired. I'd probably say it was more just complete misery.
I would like to do one at some point in my lifetime. I worry about my knees, but every now and then I think, if my wife were out of town and she took the kids, I would just go out my neighborhood. I know exactly how long the loop is in this place and just run a marathon to see what it's like. And that way, if I need to go get a drink or use the restroom, I'm close to one and nobody's assessing my performance. And just to say, I would love to have that experience of doing it, but I can imagine those last 7 miles could be really rough. I mean, I can't imagine getting to 20 and still having 6.2 to go. That would be
no, it was
pretty brutal.
Unpleasant to say the least.
Yeah. So anyway, so we talk about tired meaning fatigued a lot, but tired can also mean I'm sitting in this lecture and I'm having trouble keeping my eyes open. I was talking to a baseball player who said the first time he met his college baseball coach, they were one-on-one in the coach's office and he fell asleep. So that to me is sleepy. That's somebody who's driven to sleep. He's probably got plenty of energy to go out in the baseball field and hit some balls off a tee, but he's having trouble keeping himself conscious. And so you're right. We often confuse not only the language, but the pathway forward when we feel those things. When you feel fatigued, I believe you should rest. Okay, your legs can't carry any further, or you just ran a marathon. My guess is you didn't finish up the marathon, go home and mow the lawn. You might think, well, I planned on mowing the lawn, but boy, that marathon took so much out of me. I'm going to go sit down in my living room and put on an episode of, the Romanovs or something I've been watching and just completely chill and try to get this energy back in my body.
Oh, yeah.
For a lot of people, when they feel fatigued, two things happen. Number one, I feel fatigued, so therefore I must be getting poor sleep and need to sleep better. That could be the case, but you might be fatigued because your vitamin D is low, or you have hypothyroidism that's yet to be diagnosed, or low testosterone if you're a guy. But for a lot of people, chronic fatigue is immediately tied to their sleep. Like I said, could be, or it may have nothing to do with your sleep. And in the case of somebody who's listening to this podcast who's chronically fatigued and desperately trying to get 8, 9, 10 hours of sleep because they feel like if they can, it will make their fatigue better, they may be going down the wrong path and upsetting both things at once. The other thing is we often try to achieve improved fatigue by going to bed and going to sleep. And just like you said, if you're truly fatigued but not really sleepy, you're going to get in bed desperate to fall asleep, so your fatigue is better. You don't fall asleep. In fact, it takes you 2 hours to fall asleep. And that can be very frustrating to people. It can upset people's sleep. And now you go to the doctor and say, I feel terrible, and it's because I have insomnia. No, you don't really have insomnia. It's that your expectation of sleep and how much sleep your body actually needs are not in sync. It's like hanging out with football players all the time and thinking, wow, I like those guys. They're a lot of fun. They're super healthy and they have no trouble socially. I want to be like them. Therefore, I'm going to eat an entire extra large pizza for lunch every day, just like they do, because it's working out really well for them and they have no trouble with that. So I've got every expectation in the world that eating that extra large pizza with plenty of protein, lean proteins on it, this organic tomato sauce is really the key to my health. And now I can only eat 3 slices and I feel sick to my stomach. And I'm literally throwing away over half the pizza every day for lunch. So now I go to my doctor and say, I feel terrible and it's something to do with my diet. I can't even finish my lunch. And the doctor's saying, well, here's an appetite stimulant. This should help. That wouldn't be a great idea. What the doctor should say is, well, tell me about the lunch that you're not finishing every day. Oh, sure. It's an extra large pizza with lean proteins and this organic tomato sauce. And he's going to look at me in my 5'8" frame and say, Chris, why do you think you can eat an extra large pizza for lunch every day? Well, because my healthy friends do and they feel great. No, so this isn't an appetite problem, Chris. You've got an expectation problem. You think you can eat that whole pizza and you're trying to, but you can't. And there's nothing wrong with you because of that. That's healthy. You need to adjust your expectations. Why don't you buy 3 slices of that pizza, eat that for lunch, and if you still want more, by all means, go ahead and get it. But if you don't, the medical community is okay with that, and you should be too. So I think that in a nutshell, that kind of encapsulates a lot of people who struggle with fatigue, fibromyalgia, chronic pain, illnesses that people can't quite put their finger on. They can control sleep, or at least they think they can. So they're trying to sleep more to make themselves feel better. And sleep is not something that we really get to choose the amount we need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one thing that you touched on there that's incredibly poignant is the concept of rest versus sleep. I think that this is a bit of I don't know if it's a cultural issue or what you want to call it, but as you said, we're so focused on like being, as efficient with our time as possible and trying to get everything done in as short a time frame as possible. The idea, the thing that I feel like I've discovered, and this was also through an interview with another sleep specialist, Narina Ramlakan, the importance of giving the mind time to rest, where you're not ingesting new information all of the time, because people literally they're like redlining their mind all day by just constantly having the phone out, constantly checking what's going on in the news. They're constantly there's always something happening. And then you go to bed at night and you just try to turn the car off and hope that you can fall asleep instantly. And the fact that it doesn't happen frustrates people, which then sort of creates this self-fulfilling loop of anxiety around sleep. Have you seen anything like that in your research, where simply getting people to realize the benefits of rest, whether that's just laying down and resting or just giving themselves a mental break throughout the day, leads to positive improvements in their sleep?
Absolutely. So you can find quite a bit of research looking at the positive benefits of resting or just taking time to be quiet and mindful or clearing your mind. So the idea that resting quietly, comfortably in bed and sleeping quietly, comfortably in bed are on completely ends of the spectrum in terms of recovery is simply wrong. In fact, one of the pieces of advice I give to young parents, stop calling it nap time or sleep time. Call it rest time. Because essentially, A, that's what it is. And B, if you call it nap time, you're creating a subtle performance expectation. And that expectation is nap and you've done your body good. Sit up there and rest in your bed and look at some books, or color, or just close your eyes and lie there. That's bad. And if you don't sleep, you're going to fail your geometry test and you won't be healthy and mommy and dad will be upset or, whatever. So we always try to take that expectation off of our children. We certainly do that with adults as well, too. I always tell adults all the time, listen, if you want, set aside a time to rest. Right. Is that me or you?
Sorry, I believe that's
okay.
Just give me one moment here.
That's no problem.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that was. I think somebody's doing construction.
Okay, well, it's okay. We'll edit out, so I'll just pick up. So when I talk to adults, I try to make it very clear to them that, hey, set aside a time to, take a break during the day. Go into a quiet place, take your shoes off, lie back, close your eyes, set your alarm for 20 minutes. Don't put yourself under any expectation to sleep. If you fall asleep and you sleep for 20 minutes, then that's great, fantastic. If you don't, that period of just meditating can be incredibly recuperative and restorative. And people who do it will tell you that. And so now, one of the things that could be incredibly potent in terms of fixing your sleep problems at night is learning to not only accept, but maybe even enjoy or welcome the idea of being awake in your bed. I personally love it. I made a comment one time during a lecture that I said, look, I'm 45 years old. I don't know what the future holds for me, but I will never have insomnia. There was some chatter and groans and questions from the audience. And I said, listen, I said I would never have insomnia. I didn't say I would never have a night that was sleepless or I would get into bed and not fall asleep immediately. And somebody said, well, what's the difference? I said, the difference is the value you put on it. So what you're talking about and the person you spoke to before sounds like, she believes a lot in mindfulness. And the definition of mindfulness is being in a moment without judgment. And that's where the anxiety loop you're talking about comes into play. I'm in bed. I've decided to go to bed at 11 o'clock tonight, and I value sleep and think it's very important for my performance the next day. All those things are true. But now it's 11:30 and I haven't fallen asleep. So now the judgment comes in. What is the judgment? Well, the judgment is I'm not going to be able perform well. Oh, great. Well, even if I fell asleep right now, I can only get X number of hours of sleep. And well, forget about it. This is just terrible. You've got to get rid of the judgment. And the judgment needs to turn from that to, oh, interesting. It's 11:30 and I haven't fallen asleep at night. That's okay. I'll just sit here and think about my day tomorrow, what to buy my wife for her anniversary, maybe a trip we're going to plan, think about my celebrity crush, or just try to think about nothing. That all of those things are perfectly fine. And so when you welcome in these periods of wakefulness at night, which I kind of do, because like you said, we redline ourselves so much. When do we ever have time to simply be in a place where there's nothing expected of us? That we could literally just think about, what's my next podcast going to be? And I'd really like to talk to somebody who does this for a living. Mm-hmm. You can plan all those things out at night. So when you start to not fear the wakefulness or judge the wakefulness, it doesn't have any power over you and will very quickly disappear. I don't meet many people who struggle with teeth brushing. Maybe there's somebody out there, and I apologize if you're this person, who lost an eyeball in a freak toothbrushing accident. You were brushing your teeth and suddenly the toothbrush kind of popped out of your mouth and went right into your eye socket and blood was everywhere. I mean, I really truly hope that's not the case, but that person for the rest of his or her life might approach teeth brushing very differently than I do, which is, yeah, I do it, but I don't really give it a whole lot of thought. Like, it's important. I want good teeth and good, healthy oral health, but I don't fear that. Why would I? Well, this is what happened to me. So every night when I brush my teeth, I've got these goggles I put on. I'm really careful about I only have this one good eye left. But people, that's how they will approach sleep if things start going down the wrong path. So to me, this ability to rest and feel fine about that is extremely important.
Absolutely, yeah. The mind running on a loop thing was something that I struggled with a lot. And the thing that I found when I read that in your book and I was like just sort of pondered on it and thought about it a little bit, I was like, okay, well, what can we do about that? So I just looked at what it was that my mind was running on a loop about. I mean, it would be the fact that I'm not falling asleep, but usually it would begin with something related to work, like, okay, what am I going to do tomorrow? I got to do this, I got to do that, I got to do the other thing, but I could do all these other things, blah, 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 blah. And it was like this uncertainty about the proper course of action. So the thing that actually helped me a lot with that was I just started literally writing down like my tasks for the next day, the exact thing I was going to do down to like the half hour. And so it kind of like took that uncertainty out of my brain and put it down on the paper so I could just be like, all right, I don't need to think about this anymore because I already know everything that I'm going to do and focus on. And it made all of that a lot easier. Have you seen any sort of practice like that, like identifying the source of the uncertainty and addressing it to help overcome sleep problems?
Absolutely. One of the things I like for people to do is in that last sort of hour or two before they go to bed, if you're the kind of individual who stresses or has concerns about the following day, students, I think you find this quite a bit, putting it down on paper is extremely powerful. I've got legal pads all over the house, and I have this little teeny legal pad my wife found me. It was kind of like a joke legal pad, but it's like it fits in the palm of your hand, but it's perfect. And I just have this series of little things I want to get done with little boxes. And when I get them done, I color in the box. And every now and then I'll start a new page. I'll ignore the ones that are colored in and transfer the ones that still have the open boxes onto the next page. But it's interesting. I also see this a lot in teenagers, but you can see it in adults too. Mm-hmm. This idea that you've got several things to do in a certain personality type that can feel quite overwhelming. But when you put it down on a piece of paper, it suddenly seems a lot less overwhelming and a lot more conquerable. Well, gosh, I can do all these things. This is not that big of a deal. I can do these top two things right here within the next hour. So just I find that when you get above a certain number of tasks that need to be done, it's almost as if the brain just stops trying to figure out the schedule for them and just feels anxiety. So I do think that that's a really important thing for people to visually see what it is they're upset about. That's one of the most common questions I ask people in my office, which is basically, they say, well, I'm I get in bed, I'm just worried I can't fall asleep. What exactly are you worried about? I'm worried I'm not going to fall asleep. Okay, well, let's say you don't fall asleep. What are the concerns? What are you worried about? I'm worried I'm going to get dementia. I'm worried about falling asleep in the car the next day, or nodding off at work, or the F word in my clinic is not the typical F word. It's function. I won't be able to function tomorrow, which is interesting because if you go next door to the academic hospital in your neighborhood and go find the trauma surgeon who's on call, she may have been up for the last 36 hours and just finished taking somebody's spleen out. Now, she might be irritable. She might be demanding that you get her a cup of coffee before she answers any of your questions. However, the one thing she is not going to tell you is that 36 hours of not getting enough sleep because one trauma after the next came in rendered her not functional. So I think it's important when people say those things, it's okay to say, I'm not hitting on all cylinders. I feel kind of blah today and my ideas aren't great and my attention's sort of wandering, but I got in the car, I dressed myself appropriately, I did not forget to put on pants today. I found the office, drove there, parked the car, walked in, put the keys away, answered a couple emails. Like, that's pretty functional. If you talk to people who truly struggle with function, people who've had strokes, people who have ALS, they would say, yeah, your definition of dysfunctional and mine are very different things. But when we start kind of building these pathways in our brain over decades and years, I take the Ambien because without the Ambien, I can't sleep. And if I don't sleep, I will not be functional the next day and develop dementia next weekend. These are not beliefs that are terribly grounded in reality. It's like saying, I've noticed that a lot of people who carry lighters in their pocket develop lung cancer, so I'm never going to carry a lighter in my pocket. Well, that's fine. You can do that. I don't think it's the lighters that are causing people to have lung cancer. We've missed some steps here. So what you're saying is true, but the way you've interpreted it is not quite correct. So hopefully when you learn more about sleep and what it means to be sleepy or fatigued or resting, you can make better decisions. And with that, arming yourself with that information can really make big changes in terms of the way you sleep and feel.
Yeah, getting that correlation and causation mixed up is a real issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm curious because, in the people that I talk to about this, just being, people that I know professionally or in my personal life, it seems like that mind running on a loop at night thing is the most common issue I see. But I want to, from somebody who does this as, for their profession, what is, at least from what you've seen, the most common pain points among people who have sleep problems? Is it like that mind running on a loop thing? Is it just they're not giving themselves enough time to sleep? They're getting poor quality? Like, what do you see the most?
I think just to be clear, the people who come to my office are sort of divided into one of two camps. There is the camp of, I can't stay awake during the day. And I love the Dodgers, but every time I sit down to watch a Dodgers game, I nod off. And I don't go to church anymore. And one of my patients had built a desk over a treadmill because that was the only way she could get anything done. She goes, if I sit down to do my work, I will fall asleep. But I've found that if I walk and do my work, I can stay awake, which is, one of the sayings in our clinic is you can't fall asleep hanging sheetrock. And that's why carpenters can really get themselves into a pickle because, they drive 2 hours to the job site, they work all day, they're exceptionally sleepy for some reason, and they get in their truck and drive home. That's the first time they've sat down all day and they wrap it around a telephone pole. So, sleep always wins. You're going to fall asleep. So when you're looking at those individuals, those are the excessively sleepy. The ones that you're talking about, the people who feel like they have trouble with their sleep or can't sleep, the mind racing is extremely common. And they will tell you things like, I can't shut my mind off at night, which is a really interesting concept to think about. And I always say, look, as a neurologist, the last thing you want to do is shut your mind off, because when your mind's shut off, you're dead. So great, think about these things. So I often challenge people, if I say, look, I think you need a sleep study, they'll say, oh my gosh, no way. There's no way I could go to your sleep center in that hotel, have wires taped to me, be in a strange bed with a young woman watching me on a camera from another room. It's just not going to happen. So I'll often say to them, great, I don't want it to. I want you to go to my sleep center, get wired up, and I just want you to lie there awake all night. Go for it. So from 10:30 until 6 a.m., just be awake. That's perfectly fine. I always tell them we'll get a lot of good information with you doing that. And it never happens. And it's also funny too, just on that point, one of the things we'll often do for people who say they can't shut their mind off, they can't sleep, and they're telling you they sleep an hour at night, is we'll tell them, okay, great. Well, I want you to go to bed at midnight from now until I see you next. I want you up at 4:30. And they look at you with these big eyes and say, midnight to 4:30, I can't do that. I'm like, why? They said, well, that's only 4.5 hours. I said, yeah, but you're only getting 2 hours now. I'm giving you 4.5 hours. I'm actually giving you the opportunity to get more sleep. And then all of a sudden, these sort of mental constructions they've built start to break down a little bit. And they look like, yeah, you're right. I guess that's true, but that doesn't feel right to me. So anyway, so to me, the shutting the mind off is extremely important. And one of the things I like to tell my patients is shutting your mind off is a skill. It's not a trait. So I've got big ears and kind of strange hair, and I'm short. I can't do anything really about any of those things. Do you know what I mean? I can wear a hat that covers my ears or something, or cover up my hair or something. But those are traits. They were inherited from my parents. The ability to hit a curveball is not a trait. It's a skill. I can't hit the curveball. We'll go out there and find a couple coaches, practice it a ton, learn how to pick it up out of the pitcher's hand, and you will learn to hit a curveball better. You can improve that skill. And shutting your mind off at night is very much a skill. And there's lots of things you can do to improve it. And one of the things that I like, that I mentioned in the book, is this product called a Muse, which is literally a biofeedback device that you wear on your head. They actually make it, Smith Optics is a company that makes glasses. They actually put this device inside a pair of glasses that kind of look like Ray-Bans. So what you do in the middle of the day, you tap on your glasses or put a little headband on it, Bluetooth with your smartphone, put some earbuds in, and it'll take you through a little meditation session. But the meditation session largely consists of the sound of the ocean. So as you sit there in your office and you hear the sound of the ocean, the quieter you can calm your brain, the quieter the ocean immediately becomes. So you can control the volume and the churning of the ocean and its calm nature simply by the status of your thoughts. It's fascinating. It's so much fun. And the great thing is, the person who says they can't shut their mind off at night, I'll pull it out and stick it on their head, and they'll do a little 3-minute session. And when they're done, they'll say, how did I do? I said, well, you were 17% calm. And the inevitable question is, how good are you? And I'll say, I can usually get it into the 80s or 90s pretty routinely. Like, wow, I wish I could do that. Well, you haven't asked me the most important question. And what is that? Well, what was the first time you did it? What was your score? My first score ever was 8%. I had a young research assistant. The first time she did it, it was 3%. And it made perfect sense because this woman was anxiety to beat the band all over the place. So the great thing is, what this does is it starts to allow you to understand what you need to do to shut your mind off. And you can get very good at it. In fact, the middle infielder for the San Francisco Giants tried it one time. He was 17% calm. He asked me the same question, how did I do? Well, you're 17% calm. It's great for your first time. What was your first time? I said, well, my first time was this, but this guy next to you, his first time was 28%, one of his teammates. So I got him real competitive. So he took the device and left. He came back 4 hours later, and he was able to get it to be 78% calm. So in 4 hours, he had learned what he needed to do to calm his brain down. Now, you don't wear this little device when you go to bed at night, but when that same individual goes to bed, they've now practiced the skill and gotten pretty good at being able to settle their mind, which is going to result in one of two things. Number one is you fall asleep easier. Most people do. Mm-hmm. Number two, you don't, but now instead of that brain going 1,000,000 miles an hour, you're spending that hour it takes you to fall asleep with a much calmer mindset, which to your last guest point is a much more restorative period of time for you, whether you sleep or not. Mm-hmm. So either way, you're going to win.
Yeah, those periods of calm, she referred to as time when the brain sorts and files information gathered throughout the day. I don't know if that's actually a scientific thing or just something that, her phrase for what that does, but I've found beneficial effects in my own life of having time space throughout the day where I do that. So I actively will take walking breaks throughout the day where I won't listen to like a podcast or the news or scroll through my news feed or do anything like that, because I just want to let the mind wander to
Sure.
sort of aid in that endeavor. And I found it works quite well. And then I've also found that certain other activities are a bit like an accelerated version of that. Like for me, journaling, which is, as you mentioned, that's something that I've found kind of speeds up that process of, processing whatever new information you gathered or whatever maybe stressful events you've encountered. And I have a theory, again, this is not based on any actual scientific information whatsoever. This is just a hunch that meditation is kind of similar to that. It's like an accelerated way of calming the mind down and processing information.
Absolutely. You've touched on a lot of things. Number one, my wife just mentioned to me within the last week, she said, I feel like young people are afraid of or don't really understand what to do with the time in between. So they're either at their soccer game or they're in front of the television, or they're doing homework, or they're maybe talking with a friend. But if those things aren't going on, they have a lot of trouble doing exactly what you said, which is just kind of being in the moment. It's right to your phone, show me a video, give me an Instagram post, give me something, because I'm uncomfortable just kind of being alone with my thoughts or just sort of chit-chatting. There is no chit-chat. They're engaged when you want to engage them, but they have trouble not doing that. So I think these things are very overlooked and very important. I don't think education these days really lends itself to helping students understand what to do. They're overworked, and they always feel the need to fill time with something. The second thing is this idea of allowing yourself sort of time to wander and think. The other guest idea that this is sort of a time for information processing and sorting is absolutely true. If you look at individuals who have disturbed REM sleep or dream sleep, one of the biggest outcomes of that is poor concentration and specific kinds of memory and recall problems. So if you don't give your brain that proper time to sort of accumulate, sort through the day's events and say, you know what, going to the grocery store, buying some milk and some bread, not something we necessarily need to hang on to for the rest of our life, but that really upsetting talk we had with our father, yeah, we probably need to process that a little bit more and understand what that means. Let's hang on to that memory. If you don't give yourself the time to do those things, we often find ourselves having a lot more difficulty with concentration, focus. So you get into these very muddled pictures of what is attention deficit. It's a real thing, but why has it come about? Why does it respond well to stimulants? A kid who's hyperactive, why would you give him some Ritalin? And why does it seem to calm him down? So there's a lot of questions and answers within what you just talked about that really lend themselves to a lot of problems people have, not only with sleep, but also just their overall mental health, ability to concentrate, ability to be cognitively successful.
Yeah, the what to do with the time in between concept is quite interesting. For me, it's always a little bit entertaining when it's not just time in between, but also time during that leads to the phones being pulled out. Like when you see a table full of people who are all looking at their phones or communicating with people through their phones, not with the people sitting right next to them. It's like it's entertaining in a sad kind of way. But I wanted to ask.
Kid at the baseball game watching baseball on his smartphone with a real baseball game on a beautiful day happening right in front. That's a great one. I love the idea that, oh gosh, just give him the iPad because he's going to bother us as we try to watch this baseball game. So you see that generational. The adults can sit there and watch a baseball game and really enjoy the quiet times of I love the pace of a baseball game. I just think that's the best thing in the world. yet the child's saying, this is boring, nothing's happening, it's only two to one,
Yeah.
And the nuance, the idea of being there with your family is just kind of completely lost, and we just kind of give into it, which is really, like you said, interesting and sad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm curious. Have you heard of the book The Shallows by Nicholas Carr?
No, I'm very familiar with the song "Shallow" by Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper from *A Star Is Born*, but no, I'm unfortunately not.
I've actually heard that movie recommended by a number of people. But The Shallows, the subtitle of it is "What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains," and it's all about the actual neuroscience of what happens as a result of this constant access to information. The pull the phone out of your pocket whenever you're bored to get a drip of dopamine, how it's literally changing the structure of our brains and the neural pathways and all that kind of stuff. It's not a book that I've finished yet, but from what I've read, it's already very fascinating and slightly terrifying at the same time.
I was about to say, I don't read a lot in the horror genre, so I would probably not have come across that. But as a neurologist and as a parent of 3 children who have sort of straddled that age, my older daughter, not as much. It really wasn't happening the way it is for my 14-year-old, who all those things you're describing, we can very much see. My wife is an educator. She teaches young kids, mm-hmm. and her perspectives of how those things have changed over time is really incredible. Not only in terms of what it does to the kids, but ways that educational bodies and organizations are adapting to not try to change them back or but just basically giving in and saying, okay, we'll have 38 15-minute classes during the day. I'm making that up, but mm-hmm. you do feel like that's sort of the route we're on, where we're just going to give up, and the idea that a child could ever listen to an interesting lecture for an hour is just not going to happen. So we have to be, sort of cognizant of how can we keep their attention, because really what they want to do is figure out what's been going on their phone. And if you ever pick up your kid's phone and look at what they're looking at, I'm sure there's some really distressing and disturbing things on there. What I see is, Snapchats of blank walls or a friend's face. Doesn't say anything. Just somebody took a picture of their face and just Snapchatted it. And I'm like, what is this? Why do you do this? Well, it's a streak. We got to keep the streak going. Brandon and I have been Snapchatting each other for the last 47 days. They have nothing to say to each other, but we got to keep the streak going. So there's a great example of what you said, like you described dopamine being an issue for these individuals.
Yeah, I was absolutely shocked when I talked to my friend he is a tech teacher at a middle school, when he told me that they now allow their kids to bring their phones with them into class. And, when I was finishing high school, I was of the age that, phones were around, but they were like the old school flip phones and you could do very little with them. And it was like, no, you had to leave that in your locker. And when he told me that the whatever you want to call it, the people in charge of the school had basically said, okay, you're allowed to have, that absolutely blew my mind. I'm like, why? Like, how?
Yeah, and the sad thing is, as a parent, you can make all kinds of decisions about technology in your life, technology in your children's lives. The issue becomes, okay, guys, you can't have your phones, you can't have your laptop, but all of our assignments are on the computer. They have to be turned in to the teacher via the computer. We don't get physical textbooks anymore. What we're reading is a website online. It's a PDF. So the amount of effort it would take, if it's even possible, to separate certain children from the technology because of what the schools are doing is really incredible. If you walked into my high school growing up when I was a kindergartner, and then you walked into it when I was in 12th grader, I don't think it would have changed that much. One of my favorite things was we would read like Where the Red Fern Grows or Catcher in the Rye, and you'd take the book and you'd flip to the back and you'd see the students that had that book before you. For whatever reason, like you'd always look to see when you were a freshman, that really cute senior that everybody likes and is in love with. Did she have, oh my gosh, this girl had my book, 4 years ago. It's great. But that book, you could go back. It was like tree rings. You could go back into the 70s and see all the, versus sometimes I'll drop my kids off at their school and you see these massive dumpsters and you go take a look at what is all that stuff in the dumpster? They're computers like that were bought 6 years ago that are now completely obsolete. All of our kids get laptops in the public school now. And you have to take them. They want you to, because that's where all the assignments are. So we're really in a place right now where, yeah, it's nice to have a phone where you can communicate with your son that you're going to be late or that they need to get a ride, or if the son's or your daughter's in trouble, they can call you. That's fantastic. But trying to sort of put the boundaries on these things are terrible. I saw 160 Minutes where some company had come up with an app where when you opened up your phone, it made you wait 60 seconds just to think, just to pause before the phone will let you go. Now, this was completely volitional. You could install this app or not. Mm-hmm. And the Apple App Store wouldn't even let them put that on there as an option because they felt like, yeah, isn't that crazy? It was on 60 Minutes. I couldn't believe that. Like, don't put it on if you don't want to, but I would love my kids to have that on their phone. Maybe I could convince them. Try it out for a week or two and see how you feel. Like, it's really just about rewiring that reward pathway in our brain to not be so excited about that and maybe be more excited about reading a book like The Shallows, which I think every kid maybe should read. Mm-hmm. I had a professional football player tell me one time, as we were talking about sleep, he said, "Can I tell you something?" I was like, "Sure." He said, "I'm so addicted to my phone that I think it will prevent me from making this football team." I said, "I don't understand what you mean." He said, "What I mean is that I'm supposed to be doing things to keep my body in shape, off-season workouts, eating well. I don't do any of it because I constantly find myself with my phone in my hand. In fact, I'll come home sometimes and stick it in the back of a drawer, and then an hour later I'm back on it because I can't even tell you how it got back in my hand." That's disturbing. Wow. I mean, he was really serious that he was begging for help. Like, how can I get out from under this cell phone? Mm-hmm. Don't know the answer to that, man.
Well, have you heard of the light phone?
The light phone? Like, I have not. No, what is that?
So that's a new phone. They just pushed the first version out and they're releasing like version 2 fairly soon. And it's essentially a completely stripped down phone that all it can do is call and text. The new version is like, it looks like a modern smartphone, but it doesn't have the ability to use apps or browse the internet or anything like that. So it can just call and text. And I think the new one will also be able to use like Uber or something else in case you need to, get some transport.
Oh, I love it. Love it. Yeah, and talk about that all the time with the kids. Like, I think maybe it would be best if you just we always say, if we could just find a flip phone. Mm-hmm. You can call if you need a ride. If there's a problem, you can call, but otherwise it just doesn't allow you. And then, so the counter argument is, well, our SCA communicates via Snapchat. So if I don't have that phone, that's fine, but I'll have no idea when the meetings are. So this is where adults need to step in and say, look, I'm the sponsor for SCA. Please stop using Snapchat. We'll talk about meetings. We'll post them, in places, it's at every turn. You either feel like you're being thwarted or your kids are sneaky and they're just telling you those things. So you're like, oh.
Yeah, that sounds completely idiotic. Like, why would you organize meetings in a communication modality where they don't have repeated access to the information? Like, Snapchat's like delete after you send them, right? That's not good for scheduling. I think
so. Yeah, you bet.
That's just exactly poor organization right there.
Yes, you're exactly right. So
yeah, I wanted to touch on one more thing because we got a little bit off the topic of sleep a little bit, but I think it is all very relevant there because I don't have kids yet, but I do want to at some point, and I'm very like trying to look at this, like because I look at the way technology is evolving and cell phones and all this, like it's an issue that in the future, we will be very aware of how dangerous it can be from the neurochemistry standpoint and how we need to take steps to avoid that from occurring. But I feel like we just, like the information isn't out there yet, or it's a very unpleasant truth that people just would rather not pay attention to. So as a parent, like what, if any, steps have you taken that you think are a good way to sort of combat that, even just a little bit?
Oh, that's tough. So, a couple things. Number one, I think it's a sort of simple things. first and foremost, kids cannot have phones, iPads, computers, televisions in their bedroom. Um, and that's a tough thing. Well, I need it for my alarm. No, I can buy you an alarm at Bed Bath & Beyond. So we had alarms before phones. I can beat you there.
Yeah.
So to me, I think that it's just great to have the ritual of everybody plugs their phones up in the kitchen. I think Arianna Huffington has this little thing. It's a cell phone charger for multiple phones. It's like a little bed. So if you go on her website, you can buy a bed. So if you have little, if you have little kids with cell phones, I hope you don't, but if you do, even if you have big kids, like there's this sort of symbolism of, okay, I'm going to plug my phone in so it'll be all charged up for tomorrow, and I'll tuck it in this little pretend Barbie doll style bed. It's kind of cute. So I think that's important. A lot of the phones now allow you to have restrictions. I genuinely think that my children are not aware of the amount of time they spend on their phone. So a lot of the phones will tell you you've spent this week this many hours on Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. So looking at those things with your kids can be sort of eye-opening. And then also a lot of the new phones allow you to have a password that blocks certain things. So they get 15, my son gets 15 minutes on Instagram and 20 minutes on Snapchat, and that's it. And if they want more, they can come to you. You can put the code in and give them 15 more minutes. But it also allows them to tell you why I need it. And it also allows them to feel it. Because if they're constantly going to you and asking for 15 minutes, now you don't have to argue, well, the phone's wrong. There's no way I spent that much time on it. Because you are. This is the 7th time today you've come to me to ask for 15 more minutes. 15 times 7, you do the math.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think that just making kids kind of aware of it. And if you want to be extreme, I love the idea of a light phone or, a phone that, most phones allow you to make an emergency call, even if you're not let into the phone. So, in an extreme example, you take your kid's phone and you create a password for it. And they have to come to you. So we did that with like our iPads. Like just to get into the iPad, they have to use a password because we bought the iPad for musical practice because their teachers would send them their music on the iPad, which is actually quite easy. And also maybe like an audio track they could play along with their horn or whatever. And then also filming swimming. That's what they used it for. They could review their swimming with their coaches. That's what we bought it for. But we found it was being used for all kinds of stuff. So we just put a lock on it. So now if you want to use it, you got to know the passcode. And if you're really creative and want to be really aggressive about it, give them a new passcode every day. So here, take this phone with you. If you need it, I will give you the passcode when you need it at the end of the day or, whatever. Like there's all kinds of tricky ways and you'll upset your kids about it. But, a lot of times kids kind of come back at the end and say, I really appreciate you kind of doing this for me because we just had a 5-day weekend and, my son squandered a lot of that time, I think, because of his phone. So we had a long talk about it and he made some more restrictions and changes. And, he was kind of pleased with it. They often seem like little addicts, at some sort of meeting where they're upset and they're sad and things aren't going really well for them, but they're appreciative of the help. Deep down, you can see in their eyes, like, thank you for helping me manage this thing, which has kind of got a power over me I can't really quite understand or control.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like it's like you said with the was it the football player who literally thought it might be the reason he doesn't make the team. It's like we're aware of the addiction, but we're not entirely sure what to do about it.
Sure, and I do that. We all do it. I'm terrible about. I've got a brain pathway in my mind that when I go to a hotel room, I think I'm gonna get so much done. Okay, I've got this lecture tonight. It's 2:00 in the afternoon. My lecture's not until 8:30. I'll get a little workout in, get something to eat. It's amazing how quickly that time can kind of get squandered. Now all of a sudden it's 7:30. I get ready for this lecture. I only got 3 out of 12 things done. So we all do it. And we all can use help in things in our life that help to lend themselves to structure rather than take it away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the strategy or whatever you want to call it that you referenced that Arianna Huffington used with putting the phones to bed, because one of the things that has made a massive positive impact for my sleep has been the digital sundown, whereby it's very easy for me to just continue working, until like the wee hours of the morning, and I'm really trying not to do that. So around 6 o'clock, I'll turn all my laptop and all that off so that I can just get work-related thoughts out. And then around 8, the phone and any other electronic devices go off. And I literally take them and put them in a drawer in a room that's not my bedroom, because I've found that it feels like there's a bit of like a subconscious link when the thing is physically proximate. For example, when I'm working on things, if my phone is right next to me, I'll feel like that subconscious pull to check it, even though I have no reason to.
Absolutely.
But when it's out of arm's reach, or ideally in another room, it's like that's pretty much, almost completely vanishes. So I think that that's a pretty good way to go about it.
I think so too. It's funny what you said. I have a little alarm that goes off on my watch at 11 o'clock. And that alarm, it's just a buzzer on my little wristwatch. And it's basically, hey, it's 11 o'clock. What are you doing right now? Is it really that important? Because if you don't go to bed now, you're kind of cutting into sleep you should be getting. And it's, my wife's really good at telling me, oh gosh, put that away. It's time to go to bed. But if she falls asleep, it's very easy for me to get wrapped up in stuff. And now all of a sudden it's midnight and I haven't taken the dog out. And so anything you can do like that, just to kind of remind you or nudge you to do the right thing. I love the idea of the phone being in the guest bedroom. So it's there if you need it, but do you really want to get up and go get the phone just to see if anybody liked your tweet? Probably not. But if it's next to you, by God, you'll check it.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, we went down a big technological rabbit hole there. There are still a few things specifically about sleep that I wanted to dive into. One thing in particular, which when you think about it for even half a second with just turn your logic brain on and think about this idea, it makes a great deal of sense. The fact that, as a result of our evolution, our primitive ancestors that shaped a lot of our biological functions did not evolve in a time where they made a big deal about a difference between weekdays and weekends. So we're not really used to getting up super early on one day and then sleeping in as much as we want on the other two. So could you talk about the importance and the consistency of wake-up time?
Yeah, I think it's exceptionally important. Our brains like a schedule. You can kind of say what you want to at the military, but that idea of every day is pretty much exactly the same. Lots of outdoor time, scheduled meals, scheduled light exposure, a very hard and fast wake up time every day. All those things really structure themselves not only to make our sleep better, but just make our bodies work better. When you look at shift workers and the incidence of disease and chronic illness, cancer, it's really staggering. It really probably has less to do with them not getting enough sleep and more to do with the sleep schedule being so disjointed and out of whack that it bleeds down into other processes of our body, not understanding when and how they should function. So to me, schedule is extremely important. And the idea of social jet lag, exactly. You get up at 5:30 every morning to go to work, but on the weekends you sleep till noon. That's a fairly disruptive thing in our life. And if somebody says, look, I've got to do it, then why don't you get up closer to 5:30, have some breakfast, take the dog for a walk, expose yourself to a little activity, maybe a little bit of light, and then later on in the morning, take a little nap if you feel like you need it to make up for that time. So at least you've kept your schedule somewhat intact and not, seeing food for the first time at lunchtime or seeing light for the first time when you come out of your bedroom at noon. All those things to me are really important. So the idea of, listen, what if I have inadequate sleep? I'm on a surgeon on call during the week and have the weekend to make up for it. It's probably a good idea for you to make up sleep. There's a couple of recent studies that show that you can make up a sleep debt within a relatively short period of time. I would just say try to structure that schedule as consistently as possible. I was literally talking to a wife of an OBGYN last night, 58-year-old man still on call delivering babies. I asked his wife, what's his schedule like? She said, I can't even tell you. It's so all over the place. There is no schedule. I think that kind of existence is extremely harmful to our health. And I don't know what to do about it. It's kind of like, hey, there's asbestos everywhere. Great. Did you know it causes cancer? Oh, no. Well, we can't really just go around all these buildings and take asbestos out. Yeah, you can. And that's exactly what they did after a period of time where they felt like, you know what, this is such overwhelming evidence that we're going to have to wrap entire buildings in a bubble and meticulously take this fiber out piece by piece. I think we're coming to a place where we have to think about shift work like that. Well, shift work's terrible and it's definitely harming people and causing breast cancer in women, but what are we going to do? Not have shift work? Maybe so, or maybe a dramatic rethinking of it by somebody who's a lot smarter than I am.
Yeah, that's something that I saw a lot of firsthand growing up. My father worked swing shift, they called it, which is
Yeah.
where you work like 4 days from like noon until 8, and then you have 3 days off, and then 4 days from like 8 p.m. till 6 a.m. And it was just this complete chaotic mess. He's retired now, so he's able to get on a somewhat normal schedule. And obviously, there were other habits, lifestyle habits at play, but you could tell like that took a serious toll on him.
Absolutely. I mean, it just, I play a little game with myself in my clinic because I always ask the question, how old are you? That's pretty standard for a doctor. And then I need a height and weight, which has a lot to do with, sleep apnea risk and things like that. So I always try to guess those things just quietly as I'm sitting here talking to a patient. You're 46, you're probably 5'3", and you weigh, 145. And the ones that I really miss badly are often the people who work those incredibly difficult shifts, difficult hours. We talk about growth hormone secretion in the book a lot, which tends to come about through deep sleep, which deep sleep tends to come about through healthy, consistent sleep. And when you don't have those things, it's hard to be an elite athlete, but it's hard to be a human. All the things that make us recover from the insults that our bodies take throughout the day all happens during deep sleep. So if you're chronically disturbing that, it really does age you. You can see it in people. It just weathers them. So anyway, I couldn't agree with that statement more.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. I'm not smart enough to have a solution for these swing shifts / overnight schedules either. But yeah, maybe somebody out there can figure it out. So we're running a bit low on the time we'd set aside for this. So I have a few things I wanted to touch on before we call it. Are there any, or rather, if you could pin it on one, when somebody's struggling with sleep and they try, the myriad solutions out there, what do you think is the most common or the most damaging one that people often do that you should, or that you would say like, absolutely don't do this? And if they are already doing it, what would you recommend that they do to kind of work their way out of that?
I think that clearly the answer to that question would be sleeping pills.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I need a pill to sedate myself at night. And obviously I'm going to see the worst of those people in my clinic, people who've been on some pill or another for 20 years, and the mere suggestion they come off of it really upsets them or freaks them out, which makes you wonder why you came in the first place. To me, a sleeping pill, number one, should always have a purpose. I am taking the sleeping pill because I just landed in New Zealand and my Peter Jackson approved Lord of the Rings tour starts tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. and I don't feel at all sleepy based upon what happened on the plane and where I'm coming from. So I'm going to take this in order to try to sedate myself, sleep a little bit so I'm not falling asleep during the tour of Mordor, whatever is going on. So to me, that's fine. Your dog got hit by a car, unfortunately. That's so sad, and you're really upset by it. You take a sleeping pill for a couple of nights because you're really torn up about that. But this idea that I'm 58 years old, for the last 15 years, I've taken Ambien. Now, it's only half an Ambien, Dr. Winter. I cut it in half with a razor blade. I love that, as if it's a half? Well, that's fine. But if you take a whole, we have a big problem.
Yeah.
It's just this idea of you're taking something to fall asleep at night. Why? Let's talk about that, because my guess is that's never something that's been explored with the doctor that's been giving you that Ambien for 15 years. Why are you doing it? Because the answer of I don't fall asleep without it is not true. If we sit in these chairs in my exam room long enough, pill or not, we're both going to fall asleep. Now, I can't tell you when it's going to happen, but it's going to happen. So to me, a sleeping pill chronically is like cotton stuffed in your ear. Why you have cotton in your ear? Well, I'm bleeding. Really? Let me see. You take the cotton out and blood's everywhere. So the person stuffs the cotton back in their ear. Well, do you ever see your doctor? Oh yeah, the doctor's the person who gives me the cotton. Really? Have you ever asked your doctor, like, I mean, it's great. I mean, maybe try it once, but if you keep going back to your doctor, every time you take the cotton out, there's hemorrhage everywhere. Aren't you ever going to ask your doctor, what's wrong? Like, why are you bleeding from your ear? That seems really concerning to me. No, I've never asked them that. The cotton's working just fine. It's keeping blood off my clothes, which is really all I care about. So, I mean, it's sort of ludicrous when you think of it that way, but that's sort of what a sleeping pill is. Oh, really? Your doctor's been giving you this for the last 10 years. Do you know why? What's the underlying problem? You have a plan for getting off of it? No? Okay. So to me, that's where lack of time, particularly with a primary care doctor, is so apparent. Hey, my blood sugar's out of control, my weight's out of control, I just had another heart attack, and on your way out the door, the patient says, oh yeah, by the way, I'm not sleeping really well. The doctor's already 30 minutes behind just from that one patient. Mm-hmm. They don't have the time to invest in getting into the problem. Let's flesh out the real problem here. It's just, oh, okay, well, here's another prescription for Sonata, good luck. Mm-hmm. Which is unfortunate. So to me, I'd really like to change that culture of sleeping pill use in this country, make people understand that they're really not that effective. And when you look at data for sleeping pills, it's like the pill makes you fall asleep 7 minutes faster. It gives you an additional 13 minutes of your extra sleep maximum. And most of them don't make the quality of your sleep better, often make it worse. And, there's something that's being prescribed every night with a lot of them have side effects people are not really aware of, and it's all completely unnecessary. So just demanding more for your sleep than a sleeping pill I think is extremely important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting little phenomenon that happens there. It's like just because your doctor has a plethora of Band-Aids that he can give you does not mean that a Band-Aid solution is a good approach to take for the long haul. Absolutely.
It could not be more precise with that observation. It's the sleeping pills have a use. We've kind of forgotten what they're for, and now we're using antipsychotic medications and antidepressants as sleep aids when they were never FDA approved to do so. Even like a drug like melatonin. Let's really stop and consider what melatonin does. Melatonin is the chemical in your brain that kind of resets the circadian watch. It's the chemical that as the sun goes down outside tells your brain, this is night, this is about the time that sleep timing should occur. It's not a sleep aid. It's really more for aligning our natural sleep with our environment. So if you're using melatonin because you're a business traveler and you fly back and forth to Singapore a couple times a month, great. That's exactly what it's for. If you're giving your kid melatonin gummy bears, because if it's in a gummy, it can't be bad, I would encourage anybody listening to watch a YouTube video about how a gummy bear in general is made. You'll never eat another one. But just the idea that, oh, it's a gummy and my pediatrician gave it to me and it's natural, so I'm going to give this to my kid. Understand what melatonin's really doing before you start giving it to your kid every night, because without it, he can't sleep. Very important. Pediatricians have probably, ask your pediatrician, how much training have you had in sleep? I can tell you personally, in 4 years of medical school, we got one lecture on sleep. Maybe he's gotten 2 or she's gotten 3. And how comfortable are you having somebody replace your knee who got 1 or 2 lectures on knee replacements? That's it. That's their training. And so,
sorry, just to clarify on that, when you say 1 lecture, you don't mean 1 semester was worth. You mean like
no. I mean a 1 hour lecture.
1 hour lecture.
A 1 hour lecture that featured a man who had sleep apnea, that when he treated it with the CPAP said it made his headaches go away and improved his golf game. And it was another video about a elderly couple. The man had something called REM behavior disorder, where he acted out his dreams. In the middle of the night, he grabbed his wife's head and started slamming against the headboard because he was dreaming he had caught a deer in a barn and was trying to kill the deer by ramming the deer's head into the side of the barn. And then the lights came up and we talked about some other aspects of sleep, and that was it. And the next lecture was an hour-long lecture on fetishes, and it was mainly about men who thought kind of about women's footwear and had sexual relationships to their wives,
Yes, those
shoes,
two
which
subjects
is
have
super
equal
important,
importance.
great. I mean, it affects people. I'm not trying to diminish it, but when you think about the top 7 complaints people have when they go to see their doctor, they're usually can't sleep, pain, weight problems, or sleepiness all the time. Like the sleep problems constitute 2 of the top 7 complaints. I don't know that fetish lecture necessarily needed to be as elevated as the sleep lecture. Like, so yeah, maybe 2 or 3 lectures on sleep would have been more appropriate, but we just don't have them. So it's not surprising that when you talk to your pediatrician about some genuine concerns about your kid's sleep, that you get melatonin gummy bears. It's baffling to me. My
Yeah.
kid wets the bed every night and has so ever since he was little, and he's now 17 years old. Oh, just hang in there, and don't let him drink any fluid after dinner, and not exploring the fact that that's a very common sign of a sleep problem.
Yeah,
Anyway,
let's try to solve their sleep problem with gummy bears and give them
that's right.
diabetes in the process.
That's best.
Awesome. So we're basically running out of time here. One last thing I wanted to touch on, and obviously it can be tough to pin it to one, but if you could put it on one thing, what do you think, what aspect of modern life or people's lives in general do you think is the biggest contributing factor to people having poor sleep? Whether that's, a device, a mindset, a cultural thing, like what would you point to?
I guess what I would say is this. I think it's the idea that sleep is to some degree expendable. So when you're talking about the guy who can't stay awake to save his life, the biggest problem there is if you are excessively sleepy and you have to work to stay awake, or you say things to people like, "I'm fine as long as I'm busy." That is a ticking time bomb of sleep that you need to talk to your doctor about. If, on the other hand, you're somebody who can't sleep or struggles with sleep, I think the biggest thing we deal with right now is people saying, "Look, I can get 4 hours of sleep because I have to work 2 jobs to pay my mortgage. I can get 4 hours of sleep and I can do it. I'm fine with 4 hours." You're not fine with 4 hours. You're capable of doing your work on 4 hours of sleep. I was not the smartest medical student or resident running around the hospital, but the sleep deprivation was never really a problem for me. It still really isn't. I mean, I remember one time my wife said, I masked my basement. I was going to paint it one weekend. And I just kept never doing that. And like on a Wednesday night, she said, "I'm so tired of seeing that masking tape downstairs. When are you going to paint it?" I was like, "You know what? I got big things going. I'm traveling this weekend. I'll just paint it now." So I went downstairs and just stayed up all night and painted the basement. Went to work the next day. I wasn't great, but it was fine. I didn't fear it. So I think the idea that we can do it, and should we do it, we've got to reconcile those things. So I tell people all the time, look, I'm so glad you can get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and do your triathlon workout and do your investment hedge fund managing thing that you do, get 4.5 hours of sleep, and you look like a Greek god. That's great. But you're not, these are the kinds of people that just suddenly die at the age of 52, and nobody can figure out why, because he was in such good shape. And I think that sleep plays a big role in that. So somebody was telling me about an interesting YouTube video that I haven't had a chance to watch yet. It was called 23 and a half. And the premise is you've got 23 and a half hours to do whatever the hell you want to do. But for those 30 minutes, you have to exercise. And that is strength, resistance training, cardio, and stretching. Not negotiable. I would like to have that individual make that video be something like 16. You get 16 hours to do whatever you want to, but 8 of the hours has to be, 7.5 needs to be sleep, and 30 minutes needs to be exercise. I mean, I think that's the way we have to look at things. And if you're in a situation that you can control where you're not able to do that, we've got to figure out ways where you can.
Absolutely, yeah. As I said, I've implemented some of the things I've learned from your book and from the other one that I read, and my sleep has improved dramatically over the past 2 weeks. And there's definitely a greater feeling of just being more energetic, but also almost like a bit more, I guess you could call it emotional energy, because I'm not as anxious and stressed out about the sleep itself. So not only is going to bed at night less stressful, but also when I wake up in the morning, I find that I'm starting the day less stressed out too. And the quality of life change has been absolutely dramatic. So I think it's an underappreciated issue that is a lot more common than we think. And I think that your book's a great way to dive into that. And with that, we're just about out of time for now. So if people want to find out more about you, where's the best place they can, follow you? Obviously, your book, which is The Sleep Solution, is on Amazon. Is there any other places they can keep up with your work or anything else that you're doing?
Sure. So I try to keep my Twitter account full of good information about sleep or articles I've worked on or contributed to. So that's at Sport Sleep Doc. So it's SportSleepDoc at Sport Sleep Doc on Twitter. I do keep a pretty thorough list of information about sleep under the press section on my webpage, which is Seville Neuro and Sleep. If you just type in Chris Winter and sleep, and it'll pop up. So those are the two places I really try to reach out to people and stay communicated. Obviously, my book you can buy on Amazon. It's The Sleep Solution: Why Your Sleep's Broken, How to Fix It. You can buy it on Audible. You can download it to your Kindle. There's hardback, paperback, and a bunch of different languages too, which is absurd and crazy. But so I think people will find it to be a good read, and I always love feedback about it. It's great.
Absolutely, yeah. And like I said, it's entertaining as well as educating. So it's not the type of book that's going to put you to sleep while you're reading it, but I guess if it does, then it's done its job anyway.
That's what I tell people all the time. It's either the best sleep book in the world, in which it'll totally transform your sleep, or it's so deathly boring that you won't be able to make it a page or two without falling into a stuporous coma.
Beautiful. All right. Yeah, that's all the time we have. I appreciate you coming on, Chris. And if you have any, I don't know if you ever decide to write book number 2 or have any interesting developments that you'd like to share, maybe we can have you back on for round 2.
Sounds good. Book number 2 hopefully is on the way. I've started. It's about sleep in children, which was originally kind of part of the book. The whole book story is a story in of itself, but it was originally part of the first book. But I thought this really deserves its own treatment. So that'll be the next book, and that'll be a lot of fun.
Excellent. All right. Looking forward to it.
Well, thanks for having me, Brandon. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in. To check out any book recommendations, tips, and other resources mentioned, go to our website, deskbound.co/episode 20 to see the full show notes. And while you're there, click the free course button at the top to learn how sedentary life damages your health and what you can do about it.